1, okay?
Yeah, page 210, right?
Page 210. Assume that Nolanville's fiscal year ends on December 31st. Now, it says here, Nolanville's payroll for one of its departments is $15,000 per week. It pays its employees on the Thursday of the week following that in which the wages and salaries are earned. In 2012, December 31st fell on a Wednesday. For the work week beginning Monday, December 29th, and ending Friday, January 2nd, 2013, employees were paid on Thursday, January 8th. For fiscal 2012, what amounts should the city recognize as wage and salary expenditure or expense pertaining to the week ending Friday, January 2nd in its fund statements and in its government-wide statements? Now let's just think about it logically. If the payroll is $15,000 a week, what does that mean it is per day? $3,000 per day. And if the period ends on Wednesday, that means 3,000 times 3 days. And so wouldn't we report for payroll expenditure in the fund statements $9,000? And in the government-wide statements, wouldn't we report payroll expense of $9,000? It's going to be the same figure, be it general fund or government-wide fund. We're just going to call it something different when we have it in the general fund versus when we have it in the government-wide fund. Does that make sense? So let's just say we could have a quiz like this, guys. I could have something identical to this, saying the payroll, December 31st ends on a Thursday, the payroll's $15,000 a week. What would it be, what number would be used in the general fund? What number would be used in the government-wide fund? 12,000. If it ends on Thursday. Does that make sense? This is just like for-profit accounting. You accrue it, right? Even though you don't pay it until the next week, you accrue it. And because in the general fund, you can have current liabilities that are going to be paid within 60 days, it's good. Okay, let's talk about the next one. In its fund financial statements, the city would recognize the receipt of a new computer. Now, I'm not worrying about new computer. I told you, we're just going to be dealing with payroll and supplies, right? I know, but I'm not going to deal with it because it's kind of a fixed asset, and so you're right, but I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, let's look at exercise 5.2. The Eaton School District engaged in the following transactions during the fiscal year ending August 31st, 2012. It established a purchasing department which would be accounted for in a new internal service fund to purchase supplies and distribute them to operating units. What do we know about an internal service fund? What is it like? It's like an enterprise fund. It acts as like a business. And so it uses full accrual basis of accounting. To provide working capital for the new department, it transferred $1.7 million from its general fund to the internal service fund. It gives us a list of things. During the year, operating departments that are accounted for in the general fund, which we know as modified accrual, acquired supplies from the internal service fund for which they were billed $300,000. Of this amount, the government transferred $200,000 from the general fund to the internal service fund, expecting to transfer the balance in the following fiscal year. The supplies had cost the purchasing department $190,000. During 2012, the operating departments used only $220,000 of the supplies for which they were billed. They had no supplies on hand at the start of the year. Guys, we're on exercise 5.2. As I was stating to everyone, quiz 3 is out. I chucked it. well, the next chapters, the quizzes on this, the quizzes that are gonna be from here on out will only deal with what we're discussing in this chapter, payroll and supplies. We're gonna deal with the consumption method and the purchase method. And so that is it. We're not gonna bring anything else into the quiz. So any problems that are not related to supplies and payroll, we're not talking about. So the quiz is probably gonna be much shorter also, okay? But what I'm doing is I'm looking at exercise 5-2 as it relates to the supplies, okay? So match the items below with the amounts that follow. An amount may be selected once, more than once, or not at all. Amount that the general fund should recognize as supplies expenditure, assuming that inventory is accounted for on a purchases basis. So what is the amount that exercise 5-2.
1.7.
Match the items below with the amounts that follow. There it is, okay. So the first one, the amount that the general fund should recognize as supplies expenditure, assuming the inventory is counted for on a purchases basis. Now, do you see in that second portion during the year operating departments that are accounted for in the general fund acquired supplies from the internal service fund for which they were billed $300,000? You see that? So a purchases basis is going to be basically what they were charged. And they in fact were charged $300,000, and so that would be the amount that the general fund would recognize as supplies expenditure. We're not going to worry about number 2 because we're not talking about pensions. We're not talking about non-reciprocal transfers out or debt. So do you see I'm going to skip out on a lot of this, guys. We're going to only focus on supplies and payroll, okay? Let's look on to example 5-3. Am I confusing you, Carmen?
So we did exercise 5-2, we just did the number 1, that was it, and now we're on the exercise.
That's it.
Okay.
Why? Because the others are dealing with other types of expenditures. The other portions are dealing with debt or capital outlay or transfers. Remember I told you I didn't want to get into all those others? We're only dealing with how many, Todd?
2.
Judy, how many?
2.
Do you see? So we're going to skip over a lot.
Okay.
But I would rather us understand how we record payroll and how we record supplies. We're not going to worry about the other kinds of expenditures right now. Okay? Let's kind of cement 2 areas. Do you understand what I'm trying to do here?
So we're only putting payroll and wages and supplies.
Correct. Let's look at example 5-3. The purchases method differs from the consumption method. Now, we talked about this a little on Thursday, and we're going to go over it again. So let's look at the differences here. We're going to do 5-3. The Boyd School District began a recent fiscal year with 3,000 of supplies in stock. During its fiscal year, it engaged in the following transactions relating to supplies. It purchased supplies at a cost of $22,000. It paid for $19,000 of the supplies. It used $20,000 of the supplies and therefore had $5,000 in supplies inventory at year end. What the heck does all that mean? This is the stuff I care about. This is what you're going to see. Okay? So, record the transactions assuming that the district uses the purchases method. So
purchases, we do it all up front, right? We put it all as an expenditure.
all up front. So what we're gonna do here with the purchases, if purchase supplies costing how much?
22.
And then accounts payable, right? So what does this do to record the acquisition of supplies? Guys, let's just take it a step further. What if, do you,
Oh, good job.
Pull the screen down.
I'm only 4'11". I can read it.
I'm sorry, guys. Judy, I didn't understand what the problem was. Okay, how do I make this bigger? Okay, okay, this said it purchased supplies. What if we said it ordered supplies?
Nothing happened.
Nothing.
But if we're
Okay,
having
if
to
we
do a
ordered-
budget,
If we ordered them, we have to earmark the money.
yes.
And
But I'm gonna say to you, we wanna be aware, hint, be aware of budgetary entries. Hint, don't worry about budgetary entries. Here, we're not worrying about budgetary entries, it's just telling us it bought supplies. You have to worry about those budgetary entries when you order, don't you?
so that someone else doesn't take your money before you spend
Correct.
it.
Does that make sense with the differences, guys? Do you remember on Thursday that different problem we had? What was different from it? Remember we ordered supplies and then we did all this encumbrances and reserve for encumbrances, and it's like, what the heck's going on? I will say to you, don't worry about budgetary entries, or I'll say, what would the budgetary entry be?
So the budgetary entry is encumbrance.
Yes, Todd, this weekend must have served you well. Next, so here we recorded the acquisition of supplies. Now, it says we purchased supplies of 22, but how much did we pay for?
19.
Well, what the heck?
So that'll be accounts payable and cash.
Accounts payable for, and this is to record the payment of amounts owed. Now, we have one more entry we have to do.
Are we gonna have to put the explanations on the test?
I don't care. Only if it helps you. Now, what's the next thing we do? We do want to show it used 20,000 of the supplies and therefore had 5,000 of supplies inventory at year end. So it's telling us that for not the purchases method, but the consumption method. Let's just look at, if we purchase supplies of 22 and we use 20 of it, what are we going to show is in supplies inventory?
We have to use 2,000.
Yes. So supplies inventory of 2,000 and fund balance non-spendable 2,000. And that would be, for those of you, to increase the balance in inventory and the fund balance non-spendable account from the beginning of year balance of 3,000 to the end of year balance of 5,000. Because remember, guys, when 3,000 of it came in from the previous year. So we already have a 3,000 non-spendable account, don't we? But what we had this year, we added 2 to it. Does that make sense? Yes? No?
Yeah, but I do have a question, like, why wouldn't they use, what they had at the year end for 3,000 before they started using
Because
this produce?
they may or may not have used it,
That'd be a different
technically.
type of supply.
But technically speaking, that balance brings in from the year before, and the only thing we're doing with the purchase of supplies is showing what we purchased and what was